We've got a whole host of amazing panelists, authors, and presenters, and professors, and UDL facilitators and coaches. And we're going to talk about how we can really lead UDL learning regardless of your setting. So if you're in university setting, if you're online, if you're in a school building, we've got some strategies and we've got some wonderful resources for you. So as we get started, I'm gonna hop over here and we're gonna introduce everybody and both our facilitators and our panel. Let me just share my screen here. And here we are. So welcome to the UDL IRN Network and Learn, diving into meaningful learning. And first of all, if you're here with us, we want to make sure that you know how to get in touch with us. So we have a Zoom chat here. If you're joining us on our Zoom, live on our Zoom, please feel free to use the chat. You can give a shout out to any of our presenters, comment, provide feedback, ask questions. We have Sue Harden is going to be monitoring the Zoom chat there. So if you have any questions, make sure you get them to Sue and she'll pass them along to our panelists this evening. And then we have Brian Dean who'll be monitoring our Twitter feed, the UDL hashtag UDLIRN. So if you're hanging out in the Twitter feed there, you can tweet out your questions, your comments there, and Brian will relay those on to us. And also live on YouTube, we'll be live streaming. So you can check us out there, and somewhere in our chat and on Twitter, we should have that YouTube live streaming link. So you can come and join us there too. All kinds of ways to get in touch. Tonight, as we get started, just to give you a little setup of what we're going to be doing. We're going to have some of our panelists kind of set the stage. They're going to introduce themselves, tell a little bit about their UDL story, their journeys, what they're going to be bringing to our conversations tonight. We'll have a great discussion with those panelists, and then we're going to have a little audience question and answer at the end. So make sure you're sharing your questions as we go along, or write them down and save them for the end, and we'll get those out to our panelists. So without further ado, I want to introduce tonight's facilitators. We have Sue Harden, like I mentioned before. She's our UDL IRN Board of Directors and Assistive Technology and UDL Coordinator for Macomb ISD in Michigan. We also have Brian Dean. Brian Dean, now the Space Uterus for Northern Ival. It's a very, very fancy title, Brian. I really like that. So
I didn't choose it. I didn't choose it, Corinne. I feel like I have to say that.
I feel like it chose you, though. I think that is
very good.
It's
very
absolutely
good.
The perfect title for you. So Brian Dean will be monitoring our Twitter chat. And then we also, and then myself, Corinne Howard, I'm an assistive technology consultant and UDL enthusiast, I guess I'll say, from Muskegon area ISD. And so tonight, our panelists, we are really honored to have Dr. Luis Perez here. He's a co-author of Dive into UDL, Learning on the Go presenter, the AIM Center Technical Assistance Specialist, just lots and lots of experience with UDL and accessibility. So Dr. Luis Perez is here with us today, as well as Kendra Grant, another co-author of Dive into UDL, an educator and presenter. So we'll be hearing a little bit more from them in just a moment. And then we'll also have Helen, who is the Faculty of Education, on the Faculty of Education for Lakehead University in Ontario, Canada. And she'll talk a little bit about how she has facilitated some really impressive UDL learning and online environment through ISTE, and then as well as Tom Hinken. Tom Hinken is a social studies consultant and a UDL professional learning facilitator with Muskegon ISD. So we're going to turn it over to them in just a moment. I'll let them introduce themselves a little bit more, and maybe I'll just head over just for a second to Luis and Kendra. If you guys want to just chime in, introduce yourselves, just talk a little, maybe provide a little bit of background on who you are and why you're here. What's your UDL journey? How did you come to UDL?
Want me to go first, Luis?
Sure, I'll go for it, Kendra.
You'll have a longer story probably than me.
Oh, you never know. I might give you the short edition tonight.
So I was an educator here in Ontario, Canada for about 25 years. And my background was in library and special education. And I started back in assistive technology back in the late 90s when the Kurzweil tools first came out. And I really felt like this was going to change the way kids learn. So for me, my background has always been in education, but then I went into the business end of things and had my own PD company. And you'll see how these two things kind of come together in the book. And that was, I was in Portland, Oregon, and we did PD around in, technology and how to actually put it into your pedagogy rather than this extra thing or clicking on tools and those kinds of training and really bringing it into your classroom. And so those sorts of things came together, and I always had universal design for learning was always a big part of that. Currently right now, I actually work in adult education. And so UDL for me is something that I want to bring to the adult learning space as well in corporate environments. And I looked at your question about my UDL journey, and I thought it was really interesting. I actually was a teacher librarian. It was 2004, and I read Teaching Every Student in the Digital Age. And that was kind of, for me, that aha book. That really was what I was trying to do in the classroom. And in that school, we had about 60 languages represented. We had kids who would come to the school, and when we'd ask their parents, how long have you been in Canada? They'd look at their watch and go, 10 hours. So we had all these really diverse learners coming together. And for me, that book came right at the right time where we really wanted to do something different with the technology. It was just starting to really be able to be robust and something that the kids could use. And that's really where it started for me, was as a teacher librarian, and bringing that to all of the people in our school at a very rudimentary level. Now that I look back, you know, I was only wading in, but it still made a real difference in kids' lives.
Excellent. Yeah, love to hear that really whole full circle. So from, you know, experience it from that teacher's perspective, and then into product design and development, and then now back to teaching others about it. It's a very diverse and comprehensive, I guess, UDL experience there. Very cool. Luis, how about you?
Well, first of all, I want to highlight that this is a binational panel tonight. We have a couple of representatives from Canada, and then a few of us from the US. So it shows you that, you know, it's we can collaborate across borders. So it's really exciting to see that. My UDL journey is pretty interesting because I didn't intend to be an educator. My college degree is in political science. I'm a political scientist by trade. And actually after college, I taught for a year as a Spanish teacher, and it did not go so well. So I decided to leave education for a little bit and went to work as an immigrant rights advocate for a number of years for a nonprofit, an NGO. And it turns out we were doing a lot of education, just different types of education. So education didn't really leave me, if you will. It's just that I was in a different setting. And around that time, this thing called the internet was catching on. And so I became really interested in that and started doing some web design work, web development. And that's, as I say, the universe has a weird way of working out, because I started learning about accessibility, not as a professional consideration of, you know, the websites that I was designing. I needed to consider accessibility for those. And a few years later, I was diagnosed with a visual impairment. So what was a professional consideration now became a very personal thing that I needed to think about. And so that really ignited my fire, if you will, to go back to school and get a degree. So I got a degree as an instructional designer, and did a lot of work around teacher preparation, worked with pre-service teachers and technology integration, and then kind of moved on from there and started looking more at the assistive technology and the universal design for learning. And so that's where I've been for, you know, about the last 10 years or so. It's really doing a lot of consultation around assistive technology, accessibility features. And then today I'm at the National AIM Center, where we promote high quality, accessible educational materials across the lifespan. So traditionally we worked with K-12, but our mission has expanded to include higher education and the workforce. So we like to say that, from twinkles to wrinkles, we got you covered when it comes to accessible educational materials and technologies.
I love that. I think that's the best tagline I've heard in quite some time. That's fantastic. Wrinkles to wrinkles.
It sounds better than womb to tomb, I think.
Agreed. For sure. All right. Thank you both very much. Before we go into a little bit more about your journey, I'd like to, and this amazing book that you've done, and I'd like to introduce or have them introduce themselves. First, Helen, would you mind just tell us a little bit about who you are and your journey into UDL?
Sure. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the book study that I've coordinated with ISTE ILN network. So my passion, my UDL journey really comes or stems from my classroom teaching experience, my work as an educator, special education resource, computer lab instruction, way back when computer labs were the way to teach. And now at the Faculty of Education, as I work with pre-service teachers in their struggles to find and figure out how to make things really work for their students as they go into the classrooms. So I'm relatively new to the terminology and the framework with UDL, but I've been teaching from a UDL kind of environment as I've done all of the teaching that I've done over the course of the years. So it's nice to have this framework to build and structure things around and really make sure that I'm opening all of the opportunities and all of the doors that are available for students. And I think I'll just mention that the connection for Luis and Kendra and I really stemmed from a small, supportive, open online course that they did a number of years back called the SOOC. And I was interested in dipping into computer apps at the time and just came across, randomly, serendipitously came across the SOOC and participated with them in learning more about UDL and computer apps. So that's where we've connected and I guess grown since.
Fantastic. What a fortuitous connection to make right there. Absolutely. We're all involved. And Tom, do you mind just introducing yourself a little bit and talking a little bit about your UDL background and how you got where you are in your UDL journey?
Sure. Hi, everybody. So I'm a social studies consultant at the Muskegon ISD. It's a new gig. I spent a little over 20 years teaching, first 5th grade and then 7th grade. The UDL journey started for me, I think 3 years ago or so, when the Muskegon ISD, Corinne and some others started a push and asked people to come in from around the county. We'd meet in the evenings, have dinner and dialogue. I kind of fell in love with it because I saw it as a way to reach a lot of the kids that traditionally we were not reaching. After that, I practiced it for a year in my room. Then last year, I led a team in our middle school with some success. This year, I'm still leading the team at the middle school. We have 2 teams there now. Everybody in the school is on one of the 2 teams. So it's a school-wide push. And as a social studies consultant, now I kind of like it because when I go work with other teachers, I can use UDL as a lens to offer ways for them to help their students. So I'm really glad to be here tonight.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much for taking the time to do that. I love the diversity of this panel, and Luis pointed out not even just from international sort of a standpoint, but We have really people of all different who came at UDL or came to UDL from such a variety of perspectives and backgrounds. And I think it really says something about how throughout, it kind of really stands the test of time and environment and languages, that it really is this framework that can be really uniting and meaningful to a lot of different people. So pretty cool. So I'd like to just start with, I have a few questions as we get started. A few questions for Luis and Kendra, if you guys don't mind starting. Just tell us a little bit. So you have this new book, Dive into UDL, which I happened to pick up off the presses when it came out, and really, really enjoyed it. And we're diving into that book along with some other resources with a couple of different groups that in our county who are facilitating UDL learning around. But tell us a little bit about this new book of yours, and with all the possible topics that you guys have are passionate about, which is more than a few. Why UDL, and how did you come to partner together around this?
Well, I can tell you how we came to partner together is through the ISTE Inclusive Learning Network. So I'm the current president, and I've had a number of roles within the ISTE Inclusive Learning Network. I was professional learning chair, vice president, now president, and then Kendra has been one of our president as well, and she's done professional learning. So we are partners in crime. We've traveled around the world. I don't know if you remember, Kendra, getting lost in Poland and going around the same block a few times because we couldn't find where our hotel was. Yeah. So we've had all kinds of fun traveling around the world. But really, I think there are a couple of things that kind of gave rise to this book. One was the SOOC that Helen already mentioned. That's something that Kendra, myself, and another colleague of ours, Elizabeth Dalton, the three of us developed and piloted for the ISTE Inclusive Learning Network. So if you're familiar with the MOOC, right, a massive open online course, the SOOC was a variation of that, but a much smaller community. It was community of practice model, and then with lots of supports built in. And so Helen can tell you a little bit from her side of it, what that was like. But what was interesting about the SOOC is we were participating in it, not just as instructors, we were actually completing all the assignments and submitting our thoughts and sharing our artifacts and our thinking right along with everybody else. So it was kind of a different model. And so we collected some data based on that, and then we published a book chapter and an article that was published in CSUN's journal. And so that was kind of the background for the book. But really what motivated us to write it is, I don't know if you remember this, Kendra, but the two of us were at a booth at the ISTE conference a few years ago in Philadelphia. And we were kind of giving our spiel to this person about what we do as the ISTE Inclusive Learning Network. Yeah. And this educator said, I don't have any of those students in my classroom. And so that kind of was a wake-up call, because we've been doing this work in some ways, sort of preaching to the choir, right? And so it just kind of highlighted to us that we needed to step away and kind of reach out to these new audiences, the general education audience that typically goes to conferences like ISTE, and make them aware of, what a rich framework UDL is and what it has to offer to them. And then I also thought that the fact that it's ISTE and people they already have a pretty strong background in technology, that we could make a connection between, UDL and the ISTE standards, and how the ISTE standards support ownership and variability now, thanks to the efforts of people like our colleagues, Mindy Johnson from CAS, who has been part of ISTE for quite some time. So I just thought the time was right to kind of expand UDL, be beyond a core audience, and look at a place like ISTE and try to bring more people into our tent, if you will. So Kendra, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I was going to say in the SOOC, what we try to do is give people all those options and choice. So we modeled UDL in it. But even when I analyzed some of the data that came in, we did have people who still were like, well, I didn't participate. I watched and I learned a lot, but I was like too afraid because I wasn't like an expert. I wasn't good enough at it. And although other people saw us and went, we realized that you weren't the only expert. We had other people who could be experts. But it was interesting to me, those people who still kind of struggled with it. So that was part of the design around the book was, you know, it's this idea that you have to be this expert before you can do UDL, or you have to do all of it. And if you don't do all of it, you know, you must be doing something wrong. And so for me, it was really about, like I said, when I first started, I was really wading in, thought I was doing it all. But the point is, even a little bit of change is going to help learners. And so that was really, for me, the book kind of modeling that. And the other piece came from my role as having my own company. And a lot of times when I traveled around to different districts, a lot of times teachers would say, tell me what to do. Give me the program. And I'm not quite sure where that came from, but part of it I thought was about owning your own professional learning and being, not having someone tell you what you should learn, or come to this and we're going to tell you what steps to take in order to be a good teacher. So that idea of owning your own professional learning was that other piece that for me was an important part of the book. And I know, Louise, I know we had interesting discussions with our editor and you about putting that part first and not talking about UDL until it kind of comes later in the book. But for me, it's kind of framing that learning yourself, that you're a learner. And until you do that, you know, you're not really going to perhaps bring as much as you can if you're not showing the students that you're a learner. So that was kind of the piece of it where I brought the two together. And I think the other piece, so for Louise, for partnering, was also, I remember when we had an ISTE, our Inclusive Learning Network, we had those meetings where we all came together at the end of ISTE. And I remember this guy coming and kind of challenging us a little bit, very politely, on the inclusive piece. And did we have these things happening? And I went, okay, this guy's going to change some things. And I think right from there, we kind of hit it off. And we did a playground where we had 9 videos that looked at each of the guidelines. And it was, for me, it was kind of like, that's cool, but it's not quite it. So I think that's when we really started talking about what else could we do to help people understand UDL and not see them as compartmentalized things, but in fact, this framework that they could use.
Yeah, and the title, Dive into UDL, it's kind of interesting how that came about, because I had just seen Michael Phelps' mom speak at a conference. And so swimming was kind of in my brain. And when we did our proposal, that was a big part of chapter 1, is an interview that Michael Phelps' mom did, where she talks about some of the strategies that she used with Michael, because Michael had ADHD, and how that was really helpful for him with learning math and other subjects. And so that idea was kind of floating around in my head. And then Kendra and I kind of talked about it. And then that's where the idea of, you know, there's different entry points with UDL. So you don't have to be yourself as somebody who's practicing UDL, be an expert all at once, as Kendra said. You can kind of dip your toes. You can go for a shallow swim with a little bit of support. And then when you're ready for it, you can sort of take a deep dive. And so we wanted to sort of mirror that in the design of the book, but we were somewhat limited by print. And we've probably heard this a lot of times if you've been around UDL, you know, sometimes print can be the disabling factor. And so we wanted to create something that was really sort of dynamic, where you could almost like choose your own story, choose your own ending, your own path kind of resource. But unfortunately with print, that is kind of difficult to do. So we were able to do that in some ways by being creative, but that's where the companion website comes in as well, because we found out that, you know, for instance, the images wouldn't be accessible to everybody. And so on the website, you'll find the images. They're much bigger, and then there are accessibility descriptions for all of the images. And the same thing with the videos. It's just not the same when you're seeing a screenshot of a video, or even with a QR code. That's one way that you could, you know, make the video more accessible, but we wanted to make sure that it had captions and so on. So again, we try to combine the best of what print has to offer and the best of what digital has to offer, and leverage those two.
Right. So, and you talked a little bit, Luis and Kendra, you were talking a little bit about that concept of making everybody feel, having everyone have a kind of a comfortable entry point into the book. So you talk a little bit about the dipping your toe in, the wading in, the swimming, and then the deep dive. So can you describe and just in a sentence or two, like, well, what does that look like as someone enters the book? How do they interact with each of those sections? How do they make a decision about where to jump in?
Through formative assessment. So right at the get-go, there is a small assessment that you can take. And based on your responses to that, then you can sort of get some guidance on which level you can proceed through the book. And then as you go through it, there's, again, those different levels are reinforced again. So that's a big part of it.
And then I see here you have linked your the website for the book and the companion website. Do you want me to pop out to either one of those? Is there something specific you wanted to show the audience tonight about those?
Sure. Yeah, you could do the website. Yeah, that one. Yeah.
So just to give a little flavor for that, exactly what you were talking about, really. Going beyond the print, like you said, going beyond the limitations of the print. So this is the companion website that you've developed to help really deepen the experience.
Right. So if you go to the top or even there, you'll see the link UDL Self Assessment. So you can complete that, and then based on your responses, then you pick, for each chapter, you'll see that there is a sort of dip your toes, shallow swim, and deep dive level.
And we describe those as well. But again, it could be that you don't have to do that. It's just one way of taking a look at maybe some of your understanding, and gives you a starting place. We talk a little bit about that there as well. You'll also notice that Luis mentioned the book images. They're over one from the assessment. So those are, I like to do, I like visual things, and they're not always, like Luis said again, they're not always accessible in a book. So we did put them in here, but we also created new ones for the website. So the website is actually, I might have pushed a little harder on some of my language in terms of what I really believe in the website, but did a summary throughout. So if you go up to the top, you'll just see we have part 1, and it has, if you click on that, you'll be able to just see kind of the basis of each of these pages. It just gives a little bit of an overview. I try to do some kind of a thoughtful quote that you might use if you're trying to convince someone of why they might use it. And then we talk a little bit about starting where you are. And then it has the chapter 1, 2, and 3 at the bottom. So it kind of sets off that first section of what you can do. And then each chapter actually has, and I think I had chapter 3 wasn't working for me. So hopefully my links are working here. Sometimes we have to go back in and fix it. If it's not, you can go to the top and take a look. And then in that we have, yeah, maybe we'll go up to the top. Yeah, that's perfect. And then if you scroll down, you'll see where you have some other activities that you yourself could use. You just keep scrolling right down, keep going, and keep going. And there we go. So when you can actually do some other activities here, wade in, shallow swim, and a deep dive. And we're always looking for other resources. So if you have suggestions of things, but you could use this for your own learning, or if you're working with a group, you might want to come in and take a look at something in here. And again, it really doesn't matter if you stick with the wade in, shallow swim, deep dive, but it's just some resources to help you think and expand further on what you've read in the book.
Absolutely. Excellent. Thank you for walking us through that companion website. I think that helps to give a little bit of a little better idea of exactly what that was, how you created that to help reinforce and expand and deepen the learning that goes along with the book. So obviously we really wanted to feature this as an example of how you could get the most out of leading some UDL learning through a book study. There's always those challenges. I want to open up the next set of questions to all of our panelists tonight. But I know as we start to lead, as I've led some professional learning around universal design for learning, and as adults are so comfortable with a book study. It feels like a safe place to start. Often that's the first thing that people run to, or particularly if you're trying to connect over distances and you have a set amount of, set times to meet and some time parameters and other constraints. You need something to ground your time together well and make it organized. And so people gravitate towards a book, but there are some inherent challenges with leading UDL learning through something that can be as static as a book study. So first of all, to any one of you can chime in a little bit. What are some of the barriers you've come across in leading adult learning around universal design for learning, specifically maybe through a book study or maybe just in general? Anybody want to talk to that?
I can jump in if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Since I've organized the book study for the last 3 years for the ISTE ILN Inclusive Learning Network, it's so one of the barriers obviously is the amount of time that people have and feeling like they can accomplish something within a book study. So making book study activities engaging in some way, hooking their interest, having a bit of fun together to make it more engaging, and to make sure that there's that opportunity to have rich or deep conversations with other people about specific topics. And a barrier to that is whether you're organizing it synchronously, so you have to meet in the same place at the same time at a coffee shop, for example, or at a school classroom, for example, or whether you go to an online forum, the way we've done with the book studies for the Inclusive Learning Network. Scheduling it and making sure that you have a plan and people know when it ends. So we tend to plan ours for 4 weeks, for example. And each week has a different activity or a different focus, kind of working your way through the whole book or parts of the book, giving people permission to only read what they can accomplish to read and not read every page or every piece of the text that's there, but to engage with something that they do that catches their attention and catches their interest. And I think one of the other challenges that a lot of adults tend to be more concerned about their presence and making sure that they're not looking silly or feeling like they don't know something. Kendra's mentioned that a little bit already, that there's a place and a space for everybody to have a voice in the conversations in some way. And I think that's an important piece to keep emphasizing. And with each of the weeks, I was sending out a weekly email just to keep everybody on track. Here's what you do next. Here's what you can try. With the Dive into UDL, we structured the book study the same way that the book is, with the toe in, the wade in, the shallow swim, or the dive in. So we had a variety of different activities that they could engage in. So I think that's an important positive piece as well.
So thank you, Helen. So Helen, one of the things that you just mentioned, and again, referencing back to what Kendra said earlier, is just making people feel comfortable and feeling that you don't need to be an expert in this. You don't need to have all the answers. So helping people find an entry point that's comfortable for them to jump in to the learning without having to, maybe, like you said, divulge the entire text, take in what's comfortable for them and get what they can out of it.
And the other piece is for both of the book studies that we've done with UDL as a focus is different opportunities that are both, you know, physical in your hands or digital, so that, you know, whatever fits your style or whatever fits your needs is available.
And I think we lost you a little bit there, Helen. What was the last comment that you made?
Fitting the needs of the participants.
Yeah, yeah. If I could add, I think that's one of the things that was so powerful about the SOOC, as I mentioned, is that I think we need to be vulnerable to, instead of creating this sort of like, I'm the expert and you're all here to get information from me. Instead of doing that, maybe creating a dynamic where it's more, we're kind of creating new meaning, new knowledge together. And so that's what we try to model in the SOOC, is that's one of the reasons why we were participants as well, so that we could share, you know, we're learning ourselves, we're vulnerable, we don't have all the answers here. And so we're going to make mistakes as well with regard to accessibility or whatever it may be. And we're a community, we're going to learn as a community. So that's important too, I think. The other thing I would add is that just sort of having a social space is important too, because within adult learning, we sometimes underestimate the need to have fun and to just connect on sort of a social level. So social presence is important as well. So whether it's creating sort of a separate discussion area where people just share social things like movies or whatever that's completely unrelated to the course content. But again, the goal there is to build community and to get people to open up to each other and be comfortable with each other. And you may not think that that's going to have an impact on learning, but if people know each other better, I think it will, especially when we're in a space where it's sort of impersonal to begin with, right? Because we're not always seeing each other. We're just seeing what we type. So I can't overemphasize that. The social component of learning is important.
Just piggybacking on that, with we use the term the rotating more knowledgeable other. It's in chapter 3 on the website, and that idea that, you know, the more knowledgeable other, obviously Vygotsky, but the idea that we can do that as well, that we can kind of step up at times, and other times we learn from others. And I think trying to have everyone see that they have something to contribute and something to learn was really a big part of our SOOC, and was really a big part of what we did in the book as well.
So it's interesting here as I think we may have lost, Kendra, but as I'm making some notes here about some of these comments, I'm seeing some themes come up. So we're talking about collaboration and community, and ensuring like that safety, and that people feel safe in this, and that they feel connected, and really making sure that what's being the learning that's being offered is relevant and authentic to them. So those are some themes that seem familiar within the framework. Isn't that funny how that fits our adult learning styles as well? Yes, our adult learning needs, I should say. Absolutely, very good point. So this kind of starts to lead into a next question I have for anyone who'd like to join in, which is, if you're designing an ideal UDL book study, so as ideal as it can be to lead some UDL learning through a book study, what would be 2 or 3 key considerations? And maybe you've already touched on some of them, but anybody else have any other key considerations that you would keep in mind?
I'll start with one that I know Kendra and Louise will say too. Use UDL to learn about UDL.
Yep.
So Helen, can you talk a little bit more about that? Like what has that looked like in some of the professional learning you've facilitated?
For example, multiple means of action and expression. So offering a variety of different activities that people can engage in to feel like they've participated. If you're not comfortable with video, then do an audio recording. If you're not comfortable with digital media, then do a paper meme, for example, and take a picture of it and post that to Twitter, to a slow chat in Twitter, for example. Just adding text to something as unthreatening as Answergarden. In VoiceThread, if you don't want to put your face into it, put an avatar image in. So offering a variety of ways to represent what you know, a variety of ways to engage with others. So I guess use UDL principles to learn.
I'd say piggybacking on that would also be, and we did this in our SUC, two things we did, I think. One was they had to do, represent their ideas in two different ways because teachers, somewhat stereotypical, but teachers tend to like text. So we had them do it in different ways. And then I'm losing my other thought there. And then we had the reflection piece. So it was like, when you did something, then there was a reflection around how might this support you as a learner? How would it support your students in your classroom? You know, what did this do? What did it make you think of? All of those sorts of metacognitive sorts pieces, I think, were really important, rather than just having them post, but actually have them reflect on their practice and their learning.
And the only thing I would add too is within the book, and you know, the way that the guidelines have been sort of reframed around 3 different stages, right, of access, build, and internalize. We definitely wanted to emphasize that in the book, and we wanted to give a prominent role to accessibility, because I feel like a lot of times UDL practitioners, they may buy into that idea of providing voice and choice. But I always say, if none of those choices are accessible, then how much choice are you really providing, right? So it's important for us to emphasize that. And we're not going to be perfect. So that's the other thing, is perfect sometimes is the enemy of doing better. So we try to emphasize that, at least think about accessibility when you consider any of these tools like VoiceThread. So think about, how might that not work for some people, right? How would you use it if you couldn't see, and things like that. So keeping accessibility in mind as something that is essential, but we know it's not enough, right? But it is the foundation upon which a lot of those choices rest. So we need to consider that from the start.
Absolutely. It's hard to have choice when the choices aren't accessible to you, and definitely keeping in mind that has to be the entry point for our UDL frame, right? Ensuring at the very minimum that things are accessible to our audience.
Yeah, sorry to cut in, but we're actually using the book with our middle school teachers, and they identified engagement. They wanted to increase student engagement, and the accessibility. One of the quotes that the teachers picked out was accessibility and motivation, the link between accessibility and motivation. Kids can't be motivated and engaged if the content's not accessible to them. So that was just something that really stuck out to all of the teachers in our groups.
That's great to hear. I mean, yeah. It's sort of like trauma, right? A kid who has experienced trauma, they may not be in a position to learn. So think about a learner who's frustrated because they can't access the text, or they can't access those videos. Let's say that they can't, they're having difficulty hearing, and they can't access the content in the video without captions. Well, that frustration is going to have an impact on your motivation for learning. And at some point, you can only take so much frustration before you shut down. And we may see that in ways that, we think are behavior issues. Right. But there is a learning component to those behavior issues too, sometimes.
Yeah, we actually used your online supplement, the disability simulator and things like that from chapter 5. We did that at the beginning of our lesson. And then we watch the teachers get super frustrated and get really fight about it. You know, just you can see how difficult it was for them and for myself as well. So that kind of led into the accessibility and the motivation too. So it was a great connection, those two things together.
Great.
So, Tom, since you're talking a little bit about the learning that you're helping to lead around UDL, and you guys are doing this partly through the book study and using the companion website along with other resources. Can you talk a little bit more about what the other components? Now, you have the fortune to be able to be face to face with these teachers and physically present with them in their buildings, and sometimes so. From that perspective, what else are you able to bring to that learning experience?
Well, I thought it was interesting. Some of the things you said were important for the online, people being comfortable, feeling safe, are so important there as well, and building the community, even though we are face to face and we're a small group. And I know the teachers really well, but still the UDL is, it can be kind of seen as threatening, I guess. It's a difficult thing to take a chunk of. So we've been really intentional about building community and trying to make sure that we all know that we're learning together. And myself and the other coach are not experts, we're learning with them. So we've just kind of offered things like, you know, coming into classrooms with them, observing each other. We've got a Google Classroom and a Google site where we just share information out. And I'm really trying to encourage on-site coaches so they can be like on demand or on call if somebody needs them right away, rather than me trying to coach from the ISTE.
Absolutely. So creating that safety, that building community and safety and collaboration, even face to face, is something that we definitely need to make sure that we're taking into consideration.
Yeah, definitely.
And having that just in time kind of support. Helen talked a little bit about that, but in between the book studies, like continuing to keep touching base and keeping in contact. And Louise, I think, talked about that too, that social presence, having that constant kind of contact in between those formal meetings. And I'm assuming that coach, that on-site coach, would help support in a similar way, that you know, day to day or at least week to week kind of contact and nudge and support in between those more formal learning sessions. Okay, since we're getting close to our end time of 9 o'clock here, I'm going to turn it over to let's see. I'm going to go through here. We talked a little bit about our key considerations. We talked about some examples in action, but I'm gonna turn this over to our audience now to see who might have some questions. So Sue and Brian, if you guys have any questions, we'd love to hear from our audience today. If you can chat those out in our Zoom chat or tweet them out on the hashtag UDLIRN. Anybody have any questions right now for any of our panelists?
You wanna go first, Sue? I got a couple here on Twitter, but I always, of course, ladies first.
Thanks, Brian. You know what? Why don't you go ahead and I'll come back in. I have one question at the end. I'll go ahead and ask that if you want to just go ahead and go.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that's really amazing about the book, of course, you know, Kendra, Louise, you guys know that I'm a huge fan of, and not just a fan of your UDL work, but Louise, your hack game's on point too. Like cooler than the other side of the pillow. But one of the big things that really strikes me about this book and struck some people on Twitter about this book is just the depth of design that you have intentionally put into this book. And so one of the big questions that comes up is, like, how did you keep all of those pieces straight and moving forward, especially when considering that you're trying to build a book study, which is another set of intentional design questions on top of this already kind of fluid design system that you both kind of built into the book?
That is a good question, Brian. How did we keep it together? Well, part of it, we actually, to be honest with you, we kind of actually brought our editor into a new process. Our editor was familiar with tools like Microsoft Word and wanted to send things back and forth. And we were like, there's a better way to do that. We can just do Google Docs and we can sort of work. We can all be in the same document and provide each other comments and see revisions and so on. And we thought that also mirrored more of a UDL workflow, if you will, of sort of putting together a book in real time with feedback. You know, we could see what we had written before and compare things and see, oh, that doesn't make sense or that doesn't work out as well. So I feel like our editor benefited from this process as well. So,
well, you know, it's so interesting to me because really like what you're getting at is this deep level of understanding around UDL, that there is fluidity within it, right? And that it is, and you even said yourself, you're not going to do it perfect. And sometimes perfect is the enemy, right? And I think that that's just such a powerful takeaway, yet your book is so brilliantly designed, in my opinion, just unlike a lot of things that I had seen, that it seems like it is all very intentional, but even within that intentionality, there's this flexibility. It's amazing. It's amazing. And so I wonder, you know, when we're trying to put together book studies, that makes it very complicated.
Thank you for that. That's a real compliment, and it's sometimes hard to take compliments from as educators. So thank you. When I put in the proposal, I have to say I actually used Inspiration software. Anybody got a shout out for Inspiration? And because it has the way I like to see things is a visual design, if anybody remembers that software, and then it turns into a written outline. So you're able to move your ideas around, you know, visually on a page and color code and do those sorts of things. That was really one of the starting points for me, was to kind of just get those ideas out. And I think then for Luis and I, you know, we had those big discussions around what comes first. And, you know, I think the traditional approach would have been, well, tell them all about UDL first. This is a UDL book. And I think our goal was really to start framing their learning. And I think that the assumption piece, your assumptions and beliefs was a really big part. I think we don't really start talking about UDL really until about fifth chapter.
Right.
And so that was really a big piece of it as well, was just allowing people to maybe take a different approach to it rather than just diving in. And I think for me, I remember I was in San Diego Unified, and CAST came in, and even sometimes it was just so much information and jumping right into the heart of it that I was like, you know, oh my gosh, I can't really process this. So that was another piece for me, was just kind of letting people slowly get in, but maybe approaching it from a different way than has typically happened.
I would add to that, having written a book by myself before this one, that I think what makes this book really powerful is the partnership.
Yeah. And
it's a better book, not because Kendra wrote it or because Luis wrote it, but because we wrote it together. Kendra is, you know, all those wonderful visuals you see in the book, that's a talent that Kendra has, a different way of looking at the world visually and getting ideas that way. That does not work for me for reasons of I'm visually impaired.
Sure.
And I have a more sort of linear way of thinking and just different way of, you know, viewing the world. But I think the two of us together make a powerful team. So when we look at, you know, implementing UDL in the classroom, don't feel like as a single person, you're going to sort of get everything right that there is with UDL, but maybe as a team and following that coaching approach that Tom mentioned earlier, working together, you can kind of balance each other out and bring in different ideas and so on. And it's going to be like one of those situations where the sum is greater than the parts, really.
Yeah, that's the ultimate idea, that idea of synergy, right? being able to add all of those things that are really unique and building something really wonderful from them. And I think that you've hit it on the head with this book. And I think that book studies have a lot to learn from that, right? And professional development have a lot to learn from that. Just in that structuring, it's really great. The other question I had is that came up was, we've mentioned a lot of technology-based tools, and there's times that we have to be cautious about that with UDL, right? Because there's the myth that UDL exists only with technology. So if on your website or someplace else, is there a listing of how, like, some other tools that you would use that wouldn't necessarily be technology-based, like VoiceThread or any of those, to help facilitate some book studies or professional development?
Yeah, we had some listed on one of those screens. If you go back a couple of screens, that would be helpful. We can mention them out loud too.
Absolutely.
So Helen, do you want to talk through, oh, there we go, some of these here. Answergarden. Is Helen still with us?
Yes, I am. Answergarden is crowdsourcing word cloud. It's a nice way to have everyone participate in some way and really gain sort of like a vision of what key ideas or keywords would come out of a group of people, for example. It's a really nice anonymous tool. So there's a low barrier to participation for that. The one activity that that I really enjoyed was the collaborative journaling. So the Google Doc was set up with specific blocks where everybody could put in comments or ahas or quotes from the book, and then added a comment to it. So we had these domino comments happening. So it was an engaging conversation. Twitter slow chats I like because, again, they're low barrier. You tweet once and you're done, or you can tweet successively and really engage and participate. So those are different ways to get people involved.
But again, those are all technology based, right? Right. So so I'm wondering if you have a set of protocols or routines or pieces like that you would think would not necessarily be that you could just use with groups.
Well, for example, the meme activity where we had them come up with a meme that would respond to something in the UDL chapter. And they didn't have to do it in any way. They could draw it. They could hand draw it and take a picture of it.
It was the reflection that was the important component of that, not necessarily the tool.
There you go. Fantastic. Go ahead.
I just put in our UDL planning guide. I think maybe that might be closer to what you were thinking about. What we did there was, and it's one of those resources, Louise, I looked and went, ooh, we have a coming soon on the video part there. But what we did was we looked at it's got flexible instructional design, deep inquiry and understanding, and ownership of learning. And what you can do is you can go in and there's all kinds of strategies that you can pick to really, and again, we didn't want to be a checklist, but if you're like, I don't know where to start, it gives you those, and really a lot of them don't, they're more that teaching and the strategies as opposed to technology itself. And so, I mean, I'm big proponent obviously of technology, but this actually allows you to look at some other things. Just really encourage students to consider their jagged profile when determining tasks. Like it's really those sorts of things that we tried to do, rather than just go find this tool that's going to help learners do X, Y, or Z.
Oh, those are fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sue?
Yeah, so we have one question that came out of the chat. I really appreciate, Kendra and Louise, your focus on allowing people really, our new teachers, to come in and really come in at a place that a level of comfort. We're a small field, we're growing, thank goodness, but we tend to have experts that we idolize, and there's almost a rock star mentality sometimes, in our UDL community. So I really appreciate this notion of that you can come in at any place and really be a part of our community and this inclusiveness. I think that's really something we as a field need to embrace more and more of. And my question connected to that is, what would you tell a novice? What advice would you give to a very novice teacher as they're coming in to and beginning to start learning about universal design for learning? Just one or two sentences to share with the group as you're thinking about that brand new teacher diving in or toeing in or getting started with UDL.
I would say, and I picked this up from Thomas Tobin, is that whole idea of +1 thinking. Mm-hmm. So what's one thing I can do tomorrow? What's one thing I can do next week? The whole goal is to continue moving forward and making your practice, improving your practice, and having, we're always talking about growth mindset with our learners, right? We should have a growth mindset as well and be focused on continuous improvement. And sort of if you just take that approach of what's one little thing I can do this week, I think it becomes a habit. Right? Something you do once and then you do it a few more times, then slowly becomes part of your routine. And then it becomes a habit that you don't even have to think about. It's sort of automatic in a way. So that's the kind of thing that I would say is just kind of start with one simple step and then build on it. And over time, your practice is you're going to start to see your practice develop into something different. And that's going to motivate you as well to continue to want to do these things that we've been talking about.
I love that. That's wonderful. And then adding that reflection piece into it too, right? Thinking back about the growth that I've come across over the course of a week or 2 weeks or a month or a year really can be super powerful.
I'd like to jump in with just the one tip or the one thing I would say to that brand new teacher is talk to your students, talk to the kids in your classroom and ask them, how do they want to show what they know? And give them an opportunity to let you know what options are available and what they're interested in doing.
Yeah, I like that. I think teaching them about UDL. And for me, I've always been, we all have a jagged profile. So, sharing that with learners and being vulnerable. Probably, I always say, if you're an educator, you probably went to school well. You colored in the lines and you brought your assignments in on time. Not all of us, those who end up in special ed usually didn't, but it tends to be. And so it's really stepping back and looking at that piece of, what is my jagged profile? And I think the other piece is we don't always have to just zone in on strategies, instructional strategies. Could be your classroom. We actually did a webinar last year with ISTE on, your environment and having learners build the classroom environment all the way from the social environment and the physical environment. So it might be a place that's more comfortable for you to start there rather than, I have to change all my instructional practices. But I think that's another way that you can get the learner involved in building their own classroom and making it this really great place for all learners.
I love that too, Kendra, when you saying that. I know we have a lot of teachers who are struggling with thinking about changing lesson design because it feels really overwhelming and you spend a lot of time to do it for one day to finish and go, okay, that was great. And now I have to do it all over again. And sometimes starting with that environment piece, one change that you can make that will continue or can continue across time, carries over day to day, feels a little less threatening. I wondered, Tom, since you are, so close to the classroom, if you have any other piece of advice for teachers who are just beginning to think about trying on UDL in their classrooms?
Go slow and be comfortable. I think something we did this year that I think was really helpful is we used the UDL progression rubric. And the one created, I think we used one by Katie Novak and Kristen Rodriguez. And we had teachers assess themselves on there. And then we identified one column or one row that they would move to the right. So just one step at a time. So we really want to be able to move it one step, build momentum, celebrate successes, and then move on. Last year we left it a little more open and we found it was a little overwhelming for people. So the focus for us is one step, kind of like the +1 thinking that Louise was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. And using that rubric as a way to help teachers choose something that's an area that's really relevant to them and have a vision for what that will look like moving forward.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. Very nice. All right. Well, we're a few minutes over our time tonight. So before we wrap up, I just want to thank everyone. Thank you so much for being here this evening, for giving of your time and your expertise and knowledge and experience. If you are looking for additional learning around UDL and networking with some amazing experts in our fields, come join us. The UDL IRN is hosting their second Great Lakes regional event here in Michigan. So fall in Michigan is beautiful. Come see us November 12th and 13th. It will be at Macomb ISTE. We'll have David Reed and Allison Posey and our very own Brian Dean will be there. Our what is it again, Brian? Futurist? I lost
Space futurist.
Space futurist. So,
but I'm not talking about space at all.
No.
But I think what brought up the space futurist is everybody saw my Galaxy suit last year at the IRN and they were like, that's what makes sense.
That was it. But really, this is an excellent event. You can come for one day or come for both and get some learning, have some time to network with some experts in the field, with other UDL enthusiasts from our area, and build a plan for implementation. And then, of course, after you get your feet wet in that, you can really dive in here, following in the model of Kendra and Louise's footsteps here, at the UDL IRN, our national summit, which will take place in March in Orlando. So always a beautiful time to get away from snow if you're up from our area, from Michigan or up in Ontario. So, if you're traveling from anywhere else as well. And this is really an amazing event. I've had an opportunity to attend the past, 4 or 5 years, and it just gets better and better every time. Tons of national experts. This is real in the trenches, learning around the research behind Universal Design for Learning and the implementation science that goes along with it. There's a little bit of what is it for people who are new, and a lot of really deeper dives for people who have been steeped in the work and really want to deepen and expand their implementation and ability to lead learning in others. So a great event. And to follow up on one of those, the professional learning plugs from Helen, who was talking about, I think, the Twitter slow chats as an alternative way to engage. We've got that too. The UDL chat happens the first and third Wednesday of the month. And Brian, what time are those taking place? 8 p.m.
Those are 9 to 9:30, folks. 9 to 9:30. We usually tweet out a list of the questions beforehand so that you can kind of get your answers ready, because it is rapid fire and it is always firing on all cylinders. So
it's the fastest half hour on the internet.
Ooh, it goes so fast. So
lots of great ideas flying out of that. So you come and join in, come and watch, come and take away some great learning and dialogue from that as well. So again, a huge thanks to all of our panelists. I'm just gonna pop out here. I will stop my share and come out here so we can thank everyone for joining us this evening. Again, if you didn't catch the whole thing, if you missed the beginning or you had to sign off early and you missed the end, you can catch us on our live stream. Will be this will all have been recorded, and we'll be getting that link out soon. And any final thoughts from anybody on our panel or on our team tonight?
Just thank you very much for inviting us. It was great to see some people I haven't seen in a while and meet some new people. And thanks for the opportunity for sharing.
Excellent. Thank you
And
very much.
if you have
Absolutely.
not gotten this book yet, you need to go out, treat yourself. You deserve it. You need it. Put it in your life. Put it in your life, y'all.
And we will be doing another book study with it coming up. Stay tuned.
Excellent. Excellent. We'll be definitely looking for that to come out. Very good. All right. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us tonight. We look forward to seeing you soon in the future.
Thanks so much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night, everybody.